What's going on, everyone? Welcome, Rabid here. And previously, we took out BIP-110 on the Bitcoin network on a live stream, and new updates have emerged. Now, to sum this up, let's put it two ways. If you care about Bitcoin, it might not really affect you. It might, who knows? Now, if you kind of don't care about altcoins, you might not care about this at all, because eventually, in theory, this is what this is probably going to turn out to be. But anyway, let's take a look at this, as it looks like they might propose a fork and just run with their own chain. Let's take a look. All right, guys, so here we are, and courtesy of Rabid Mining's AI investigative team, we came up with an article to kind of showcase what's going on. And at any time, let me know in the comments, because I'm thinking about doing, maybe daily, maybe a couple days posts here, making a blog thing going on the website as well, with the crypto mining calculator and all that. So everything is available at rabmine.com. But if you have something you want me to send my AI investigation team out to investigate and write something up and possibly do a video on, let me know down in the comments or on the Discord or whatever, and we'll try to see what is going on. But anyway, let's continue on with this one right here. We do have Bitcoin's BIP-110 minority chain remains stalled after only 2 post-split blocks. We talked about that in the live stream the other day, what went on with that. The original proposal is officially closed. Start9 has removed its RDTS package from normal distribution, and supporters are now working towards something much more radical, replacing SHA-256 and potentially launching a separately mined Bitcoin-derived network completely. Like, they're just gonna fork it. So in my mind, if you fork something, you're just turning this into another Bitcoin classic, a Ravencoin classic, whatever that turned into, that avian swine flu coin after it went from Ravencoin. You're just turning it into another coin, and it's most likely not gonna do anything. Now, there are arguments that people want this and they're continue on with it, and it's Bitcoin forked. There's lots of coins that forked whatever and they just die. So Bitcoin is Bitcoin. The main chain obviously won last time. That's where all the miners were, everything was going on. That's what people are transferring. That's where all the exchanges are. So it's going to be a lot of work to get everyone to adapt a fork for a different chain and consider it the next Bitcoin. I really don't think any steam will come out of it. It might gain some hype at first, but it'll probably end up dying like every other fork. Again, that's just my 2 cents on the situation. That's pretty much what happens every single time. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comment section below. But let's continue on with this article to see what is happening. All right, guys, so Bitcoin's BIP-110 battle has entered an entirely new phase. What began as a temporary soft fork proposal intended to restrict certain forms of arbitrary data on Bitcoin ended up with a real blockchain split and a minority chain that almost immediately ground to a halt. Now, remember, we went through that the other day. If you're unfamiliar with that, they wanted to remove the ordinals and all the stuff that's going on in the network because Bitcoin isn't designed for that. It causes super high transaction fees, slow blocks, and so on. So they're trying to, add in knots and this proposal that eliminates all that stuff, can be filtered out so it won't go through. And then they went to have a fork, and all the nodes and miners who supported it would go on one side, and all the miners who wanted to maintain normal mainnet and normal consensus stayed on one. And it turned out that pretty much nobody, only a couple entities, went to the BIP-110, and it found a block, it forked, and then it found one more block. The difficulty was way too high. They didn't have any miners. That would take over a year to find another block, and ultimately the chain was halted or stalled, and then they said, all right, we're not doing this, while everyone else maintained the main chain and kept going that way. So they didn't point towards the BIP at all, and ultimately only 2% of the people went there. So it epically failed is pretty much what it was in a nutshell. And now, because of that failure, it looks like they just want to go their own way anyway and cause a fork. So now it's, that's where I was talking about earlier on, where it's just going to turn into another useless altcoin fork. My 2 cents, I'm not trying to say anything. There's a lot of smart people behind this and stuff. A lot of people get mad at me saying that, but history repeats itself every single time. A fork happens, it just becomes another altcoin. But again, knows by some, magical miracle, maybe it does take over. I guess it's possible, but I doubt it. Anyway, so the official BIP-110 proposal is now officially marked closed. But the movement behind it does not appear to be finished. Instead, supporters are discussing and beginning to work through a much larger change. Replace Bitcoin SHA-256 proof of work algorithm. Now, they're not really replacing Bitcoin. Remember, we got all the miners on there. This is all misleading, kind of the way it's all being worded from the team that's trying to do this. They're not replacing Bitcoin. So they want to become the new Bitcoin. It's pretty much what's going on. They want their Bitcoin to maintain the chain. But, I really don't think that's going to happen. But, let's continue on. If that software actually launches, this will no longer simply be a dispute over Bitcoin transaction policy. For miners, node operators, and exchanges, it would effectively create a separate proof of work network descended from Bitcoin's blockchain history, which is pretty much just another fork of Bitcoin. What was BIP-110 trying to do? So BIP-110, in a nutshell, is formally called the Redundant Data Temporary Soft Fork, or RDTS. The proposal was designed as a temporary one-year consensus change that would place tighter restrictions on several ways arbitrary data can be stored inside Bitcoin's transactions. Its stated goal was to discourage blockchain data storage and refocus Bitcoin towards its use as money. BIP-110 used a modified activation system with a 55% miner signaling threshold, which means they needed at least 55% of all the miners to switch to it, which switch their nodes, switch their rigs, everything, move on to that chain. And like we talked about earlier, they only got like 2%, very small amount. Nobody cared about it because they want where the money is, and money talks, and money requires all this stuff into the block so that the fees get super high. So anyway, more importantly, it also included a mandatory signaling period beginning at block 961,632. During that period, BIP-110 enforcing nodes would reject blocks that failed to signal the required version bit. That created a dangerous situation if most Bitcoin miners refused to cooperate, and that is exactly what happened. When height 961,632 arrived, the overwhelmingly dominant Bitcoin mining network continued building blocks under the existing rules, where BIP-110 enforcing nodes followed their own capable blocks instead. So, in a nutshell, is they kept mining the original Bitcoin chain and didn't want to move to the new proposed Bitcoin chain. It's pretty much what happened. So, Bitcoin won on its own chain with all the miners and stuff like that. But it also proves other things. Is that let's just take a look at this. It concludes that, Bitcoin is ran by the mining pools, and that is the wrong thing. I want mining pool stats. And most importantly, it's ran by like the top 5 pools. Look at all the hash rate on all of these pools. Like, let's go top 6 maybe. So everything, maybe Mary, we'll go here. But look at everyone underneath that. Add them all up together, and they don't equal these. So the top 5, 6, maybe 7. I don't know. But you get these guys right here pretty much decide what happens on Bitcoin. They didn't switch their nodes. And, Foundry, was it Foundry? Yeah, I think it was Foundry. Maybe it was F2. I don't know. No, it was Foundry probably. They did have a miner vote where you could pick which node you wanted to run on. But, miners are lazy. They don't want to switch. Once things are running, they're running. And that's that. So, but anyway, you voting through nodes and all this stuff, and hash power is, these guys here pretty much determine what happens on Bitcoin, which means it's not really that decentralized. We need majority of the nodes, people out there running nodes and stuff, to swap over to the other one to, really decide things and going on. But right now, based on what happened previously, it was all determined by these mining pools right here. And the chain kept going on the original Bitcoin, showing how centralized Bitcoin truly is in theory. Anyway, back to the article here. The BIP-110 chain produced 2 blocks, then stalled. So we kind of went through all the stuff previously. We all know this. So why is the minority chain so slow? So let's kind of go over this a little bit here. So this kind of talks why nobody supported it. So this is why it's so slow, because no one went to it. But the biggest problem is Bitcoin's mining difficulty. When BIP-110 split from the dominant Bitcoin network, it inherited a difficulty designed for Bitcoin's enormous global SHA-256 mine industry. Well, obviously, you fork it from that point, you got to continue on from that point. And if you don't have the hash rate to do it, your difficulty is through the roof, because Bitcoin difficulty is extremely high. But but it did not inherit anything close to Bitcoin's total hash rate. So Bitcoin normally waits 2016 blocks before performing a normal difficulty adjustment. If a minority chain suddenly loses almost all the mining power that establishes its current difficulty, those 2016 blocks can take an extraordinary long time to produce before it finally sees, a change in that difficulty. And then once, if they actually do make it to this switch, if it takes like a year to make one block, we can see it'll take 2016 years to change the difficulty, and then it'll flow like a normal chain. But, no one's going to be alive for that. That's like 20 generations to do that on the current amount of hash rate they had. Not happening. So anyway, Start9's BIP-110 analysis demonstrates how extreme this can become at only 1% of the original hash rates. Okay, so they didn't even get 2%, they got 1%. Average block times can stretch to around 16 hours and 40 minutes, and reaching the first formal reget target approximately take 3.8 years to get that difficulty to adjust. So I guess they'd still be alive, but that's a long time to wait for 2,000 blocks. Even then, Bitcoin limits how far difficulty can fall during a single adjustment. So one retarget may not be enough. That leaves the minority chain trapped with Bitcoin-sized difficulty without Bitcoin-sized mining power. And that difficulty trap is one of the main reasons supporters are now discussing a hard fork instead of simply waiting for the chain to recover naturally. So, instead of mining on and waiting all that time for everything to happen, they want to do something now and maybe stir the pot a bit, but they want to do a straight fork to a new algorithm, which would bring in different hardware and stuff. And at that point, like I said multiple times, that just turns this into another fork. So BIP-110 is officially closed as of right now, and recording this is what today is, August 11th, 2026. So the status of the original BIP itself is no longer up for debate. The official Bitcoin BIP report repository now lists it as closed here August 9th. Changelog says it was closed following a chain split with stalled mining. This is an important distinction. The original BIP-110 proposal is finished. Anything that comes in next involving a new mining algorithm and new difficulty rules would go substantially beyond the soft fork described in BIP-110. So it's going to be a whole new operation altogether. So Ocean has separated the two mining choices. So Ocean has made its mining configuration much clearer since the split. Its normal stratum endpoint has returned to serving non-BIP-110 Bitcoin work, which means it's back on the normal Bitcoin chain. Miners who specifically want to support the BIP-110 RDTS branch must deliberately opt into Ocean's separate BIP-110 endpoint or use their own BIP-110 node through Datum. That means the several exahashes currently visible on the BIP-110 page should be interpreted as the entire Ocean pool supporting that chain. It is now an explicit mining choice. Ocean's normal pool has continued finding blocks on the dominant Bitcoin chain well beyond the BIP-110 split point, while its dedicated BIP-110 endpoint remains at 961,633. So Start9 removed RDTS from its marketplace registries. Now, there are people running around seeing how they can sideload this in and keep running it and stuff, but, they're trying to remove it because it's no longer a thing. They need to do a complete fork at this point. But anyway, they removed it from its original registries August 9th. There's practical. We can skip all that stuff there. So now comes the radical plan. So let's talk about what's actually going forward right now. So replace SHA-256. Now this is where the story becomes much bigger, guys. The original BIP-110 was designed as a Bitcoin soft fork. Replacing SHA-256 is something entirely different. A network that begins accepting blocks mined with a completely different proof of work algorithm requires incompatible consensus rules. That means hard forks. Start9's current documentation now describes a possible 3-chain situation. Okay, so don't tell me they're going to go into try to multi-chain Bitcoin. That is going to be really dumb. The existing Bitcoin network would continue using the current consensus rules and SHA-256. The stalled BIP-110 RDS branch would remain the minority SHA-256 chain, and a potential third branch could descend from RDTS using a new proof of work algorithm plus a downward difficulty adjustment. Start9 labels the software for this potential third chain as new client unreleased. That part is critical. There is still no finished public hard fork client that miners can download and inspect, but discussions has clearly moved well beyond whether a proof of work change should even be considered. So this is the guy kind of behind a lot of the stuff. So Luke Dasher, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, but Luke here began a public algorithm selection process on August 11th, which is today. Like, this is breaking news right now, guys. Luke here publicly described a method for selecting the proposed new proof of work algorithm. The idea was to prevent anybody involved in the development process from secretly knowing the winning algorithm in advance and gaining an early advantage in hardware, or early hardware advantage. Luke said he had created a weighted mapping of candidates' algorithms and published the SHA-256 commitment to that mapping. Then, beginning at 1400 UTC on August 11th, a future Bitcoin testnet for block would provide the unpredictable value used to determine which algorithm was selected. The last character of the selected testnet for block hash would determine an entry in the hidden mapping. Once the block appeared, Luke would reveal the mapping so others could verify that it has not been changed after seeing the result. That was the theory. Things got messy. So the first selection appeared to point to Blake 2B. In subsequent posts, Luke polished testnet 4 headers and worked through the selection. At one point, the calculation showed publicly resulted in 9 equals Blake 2B. That made it appear that Blake 2B might be the new proof of work algorithm, but the selection did not end cleanly. Luke said that multiple testnet blocks had appeared at namely the same time and accused opponents of deliberately attempting to interfere with the process. So people are trying to change his thing. I don't know. He's doing this top secret thing here, but now he's saying people are trying to manipulate it to get what they want. Oh my gosh. And his response was essentially, should the selection be attempted again, or should they simply use SHA-3X? So the situation right now is very important to describe accurately. Blake 2B is not confirmed as the final algorithm. The attempt selection initially pointed towards Blake 2B, but problems with the testnet 4 selection left the result unsettled. SHA-3X has now also been raised as a possible path. Until an actual hard fork client is released with one algorithm coded into its consensus rules, miners should treat the final algorithm as unconfirmed. So several algorithms have been discussed. So public discussion around the proposed proof of work change has included multiple possibilities. Names circulating through the development and community discussions include Blake 2B 256, SHA-3X, Blake 2S, Blake 3 times 2, and Eagle Song and Script. The exact choice matters enormously to miners. So obviously Eagle Song, what is that? CKB or something? Or is it that other one where it was mine with 2 algorithms at the same time? I don't remember, but it'd be interesting if it became, because I don't think there's that very many of these ASICs around. So it'd be interesting if this came out, because that would make it look like these guys got a bunch of old hardware and they want to put it to work. So this is one to watch, because I think that would be kind of insider-ish if it became something like this. Script, there's a lot of script miners out there. And, SHA-3X, yeah, I guess. But anyway, let's continue on. So a proof of work algorithm determines what kinds of hardware can realistically compete on the network. Different choices could favor CPUs, GPUs, existing specialized hardware, or eventually newly designed ASICs. Well, there they go. If they cut a deal with some ASIC company, they're making their money right there. Changing away from SHA-256, therefore, does not automatically mean the resulting network remains ASIC resistant forever. It primarily means that today's Bitcoin SHA-256 ASIC fleet would no longer be able to directly mine the new chain. Now, here's a bunch of the interesting parts. So would this be a new coin? Now, in my mind, yes, I really think so. It's become an altcoin, guys. Like, come on, you're forking a coin. You're no longer the original Bitcoin. You're causing a shard to happen in what everyone has been doing. So anyway, this has become one of the heated arguments surrounding the proposal. Some BIP-110 supporters argue that a hard fork does not automatically mean altcoin. I think it does. But their position is that the market ultimately determines which blockchain deserves to be called Bitcoin. So they're going to start off like, hey guys, we're just trying to make a better Bitcoin here, and we need Bitcoin to go the way we want, which, in theory is correct. Bitcoin doesn't deserve. I'm on their side when it comes to all this garbage on the Bitcoin blockchain, because it's turned into a laughing stock. But, it just doesn't it doesn't have the momentum. So Bitcoin is what Bitcoin is now, and it's just turning into the garbage that we're seeing. It's kind of sucks to put it that way, but that's just the way it is. So they're in theory trying to save it, but if it doesn't work out, yes, it's just gonna be another altcoin. So anyway, if most economic value users, businesses, and exchanges migrates, this is what I kind of talked about earlier. If everybody does integrate it by some weird reason, then yeah, it would be the new Bitcoin. But to the new proof of work chain, they argue that the new coin could remain Bitcoin, while the SHA-256 chain would become the minority network. Now, that's the interesting part. Has never a fork in history. There's one time. But usually, if you fork something, then you become whatever classic. So something that, this is Bitcoin no ordinal, Bitcoin ordinalist less, whatever they want to call it, or Bitcoin should be, who knows? Who knows? But there was one time, Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. Ethereum, when they forked out, the fork actually maintained the Ethereum name, and Ethereum Classic, which is the original Ethereum, ended up as Ethereum Classic. So it kind of went backwards there. In theory, the Ethereum we know today is based on every other fork, Ethereum Classic, if that makes sense to you. That makes sense to you guys? But it became the dominant chain, so it somehow maintain the name or whatever. So that's kind of what they're hoping to happen here, is that they can keep Bitcoin and maintain it as the Bitcoin. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. It'll be kind of interesting. Anyway, critics strongly disagree. They argue that a continuous hard fork with incompatible proof of work rules necessarily creates another cryptocurrency. There's an important difference between the technical and branding sides of this argument. Technically, if one network requires SHA-256D while another accepts, all this stuff here, then they are separate consensus networks. Existing Bitcoin ASIC miners cannot mine both algorithms. But, chains do fork. Forks happen. Look at Monero, because, ASICs were getting closer and other things were happening that, they are moving into RandomX V2 to kind of do that. So, chains do fork to try to remove hardware, change hardware, or maybe they got a good deal with Bitmain and they want to make a bunch of money and sell miners, then they'll fork for that reason. Something kind of like what Radiant didn't fork, but they should have. But anyway, continuing on here, let's not get into all that other information today. But nothing Bitcoin nodes cannot accept the new proof of work block without modifying software. The two chains would have their own miners, hash rate, difficulty, block production, and eventually potentially separate market values. Which one exchanges labels Bitcoin or BTC would ultimately be an economic and social decision. But operationally, miners and node operators would absolutely be dealing with two different networks. So with all the money in current Bitcoin, I don't see that those farms wanted to. Now, we do, if they wait a little bit longer, depending on the AI boom, if the more of those major Bitcoin miners did move over into the AI, like a lot of them are, but they're still got to turn on, they're still converting, they might have a stronger chance if they wait longer to do this. But right now, I don't think they stand a chance. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens. All right, so we got the BIP-110 fight has also reached Bitcoin governance. So the controversy has now spread well beyond mining. On August 9th, Bitcoin contributor and BIP editor Merch formally proposed removing Luke as a BIP editor. Oh boy. Merch alleged conflicts of interest and claimed Luke had used BIP editorial authority inconsistently while being heavily involved with BIP-110. Luke rejected the accusations and said he followed the BIP process consistently. Other Bitcoin developers then joined the discussion, with several supporting Luke's removal. The discussion also exposed an unusual governance question. There was no clearly established formal procedure for removing a BIP editor. On August 10th, longtime BIP editor Brian Bishop confirmed on the Bitcoin development mailing list that Luke was no longer a permissioned user of the BIP content repository. Whatever someone thinks of BIP-110 itself, that is a major fallout from the dispute. So Luke has also taken a sabbatical from Ocean. So Luke has additionally announced that he has taken a sabbatical from Ocean, where he served as a chairman and CTO. He said his immediate focus would be moved toward Bitcoin and open source development. This should not be described as Luke's permanently quitting Ocean. He called it a sabbatical, but the time is notable. Within a matter of days, the BIP-110 chain split stalled. The BIP was officially closed. Luke lost permissioned access to BIP repository, and work accelerated toward a possible replacement proof of work network. So, what about September 1st? September 1st has also appeared repeatedly in discussions about what could happen next. So, that is a big date to see what's going to go on in the future here, but this date requires some caution. September 1st was already part of the original BIP-110 deployment plan. The BIP previously moved its maximum activation height to 965,664, which was estimated around September 1st, 2026. There have since been claims and discussion connecting September 1st with the new proof of work fork as well. However, there is still no released hard fork client containing a final activation height for this new mining algorithm. So, Rabid Mining, myself, is not treating September 1st as a confirmed new proof of work launch date yet. Yeah, we don't know what's happening here. There are rumors going on about it, but with everything going on up here, like, he got, I guess, in the back end, he probably got kicked out, but the public forum, he's taking a sabbatical, and then he's removed as a repository editor for Bitcoin and all this stuff going on. It'd be pretty crazy to see something released by September 1st because he's dealing with a lot of stuff. But hey, we never know. We never know what's going on here. But until the software ships, it remains a possible target rather than a guaranteed fork date. So there is still no public finished proof of work fork client. This is probably the most important thing miners should remember. The public repository for Dan Ohm's official BIP-110 activation client still identifies itself as the BIP-110 Bitcoin Knots fork. As the latest check, it showed only one open pull request and no obvious release production implementation containing the new proof of work hard fork. That means there's currently a gap between the plan and the network miners can actually run. Before this becomes a real launchable cryptocurrency, we need to see the actual code defining the new mining algorithm, fork point, block headers format, difficulty rules, and replay protection and network parameters. So what miners need to watch for next if you plan on mining any of this? Obviously, early mining could be profitable. We could see price spikes, just like any new type of fork and coin, but it's going to be very interesting on the type of hardware they decide to roll with. But what do we need to watch next here? Let's just find out. The next major development will be the publication of the actual hard fork software that will answer the questions that matter most. Which proof of work algorithm won? What hardware can mine it? Obviously, you need the algorithm to know the hardware. What does the new chain fork? How dramatically will difficulty be reset? Will there be a new difficulty adjustment algorithm? You think yes. That's the thing with Bitcoin. You need faster adjusting. We talk about this so much on all my live streams and stuff with BC2 and other things. Like, new coins can't just use Bitcoin's difficulty. That's for dedicated hash rate that's been there forever. Bitcoin started like this and people slowly came onto it. A new coin forking where hash rate can just move at the blink of an eye and just manipulate the crap out of it and slow the chain down to a halt because it all leaves is a bad idea. We saw this with Ergo. We see this with BC2, and we see this with everyone else saying, oh, but it's just like Bitcoin. Yeah, you don't have the hash rate like Bitcoin. So just stop it. Stop being dumb. That's my 2 cents. Anyway, how will replay protection work? Will Ocean or other pools support the new chain? Will explorers and wallets support it? And perhaps most importantly, will exchanges recognize it as Bitcoin, list it as another coin, or ignore it entirely? So, they're going to try to capitalize and say, hey, here's Binance, give us a couple mil, we'll list it for you. Stuff like that. So exchanges are probably drooling at the mouth. Until those questions are answered in actual code and infrastructure, the new chain remains a plan rather than a complete launch. So here is we probably don't need to go through the summary and stuff here. But will supporters launch it? Okay, go through here. And then, as always, here's all the sources for everything that is going on down in the description and through this article and everything. So here's Luke himself kind of going through that whole process on how he thinks it should go. And, that's his hashes. He was talking about how it ends. So all the sources and everything are available at the bottom of the article if you want to go through it all yourself. But yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell, guys. Let me know what you guys think about this, the whole situation. Do you even care about this in the first place? Some of you probably don't. And in the end, depending which way it goes, either everyone will support this and take over like Ethereum kind of did, which I don't think will happen due to all the hash rate, and they want to change the algorithm stuff. I really don't see that coming in, especially versus all the people who have all these Bitcoin miners. That's where all the money is, and they don't have the hardware to mine this other one. So I really don't think it's going to play out very well. Like I said, it's determined by those top 6 or 7 pools here. But again, who knows what could happen. Let me know your thoughts and opinion, guys, all down in the description. Share this video around if you're hearing people ask questions about this. A lot of information here. I'll see you guys in the next one. Rabid out.